Now let's add the first functionality to the application, which is adding to-dos. But before we get to that, let's get rid of the dummy data we currently have. I'm going to start by updating the index method. So instead of just returning a view, I'm going to fetch the tags from the database. Const tasks equals await task.all. Then I'll pass the tags to the view. Then in the view, we can loop through the tasks. So each task in tasks, then end each. Also, I'm going to have a fallback for when no tasks have been created. So else, then inside it, we are going to have a role that will comprise of just one column. Then I'm going to set the column to span 3 columns. Then I'll add some classes. First, we're going to align the text to the center. Then we'll set the text size to be small. Then lastly, the text color to gray 500. Then the content will be no tasks. Next, we need to update this also. Here we'll display the to-do, which is task title. Let's check it out in the browser. Just as we expected, we've not created any task. Now let's make the form to add to-dos functional. We will be using htmx to undo the form instead of the traditional way, which will refresh the page once the form is submitted, which is not what we want. But what we want is to submit the form via AJAX, which will ensure that the form is not refreshed so that we can have that spa kind of feeling. Remember I said earlier, we can easily make AJAX requests with htmx by simply using HTML attributes. If we head over to the documentation and on the AJAX session, we have different attributes to make different AJAX requests. In this lesson, we want to make a post request. So we'll be making use of the hx post attributes. So let's update the form. Hx post. This takes the URL or the endpoint we want to make the request to. And in our case, it's going to be /tasks. Remember, I've already defined the route. So this is the route we are making the request to. Next, let's update the store method. First, let's pull in request and view from the context. Then we can do await task create. Then we specify the title, which will be from the form. You notice that I've given the input field a name of title. So we can do request input, then title. Then we can save the newly created task in a variable. Unlike JavaScript frameworks like Vue and React that expect an endpoint to return JSON, htmx expects an endpoint to return HTML, hence the phrase HTML over the wire. So we need a way to return an HTML after the task have been created. And we can't just do response redirect back because that will return the full HTML, which is not what we need. And which is where HTML fragment comes in. HTML fragment, as its name implies, is just a fragment or a section of an HTML. And AdonisJS can easily return HTML fragments. Then this will be the content we want to return from the endpoint. For example, let's say we want to return a paragraph. Say task created. This is just an example, but in our case, we don't just want to send some kind of text indicating that the task was created, but instead we want to show that the task was indeed created. So what I mean by that is that once we create a to-do, we want it to be listed here automatically. So which means that what we will return here will be a role from the table. So this is what we want to return from that endpoint. And we can either construct this by hand, that is, we do something like this and update the dynamic part. Mere looking at this, I don't think it's something that we want to do. So the other option is to make use of edge partials. So I'm going to move this inside a partial. Let me create a partial. It's going to be inside a partials directory. And the name of the file is going to be task.edge. So now I can paste the content in. Let me reformat. Then inside here, I can make use of the partial include. The partial is inside a tasks directory and a partials directory, then the name of the partial, which is task. If I head back to the browser and refresh, everything should still work as before because we are basically still doing the same thing, just that I have extracted that piece of code into a dedicated file. So now in the store method, instead of doing this, we can render the partial, that is view render, then the partial, which is inside the task directory, then the partials directory, then task. Then lastly, we need to pass the task, because if you take a look at the partial, we are making use of the task there. So that is all we need to do on the backend side of things. Just to recap, we persist the to-do into the database, then we return an HTML fragment containing the task that we just created. Let's head over to the browser. I'm going to try creating a to-do. First, let me open the network tab. So let's create a to-do. We are getting an error 403 forbidden, and if you take a look at the response, so this is because the CSRF token is missing from the form. There are two ways we can go about resolving that. So the first way is the way that we are already used to, which is simply adding the CSRF token field to the form. In the next lesson, we'll take a look at the second method. So let's head back to the browser and try creating the to-do again. The request is successful, and if you take a look at the response that we got back an HTML, and if I view the raw HTML, it is a fragment, which is the partial we created. I will notice that the title of the to-do has been swapped in, which is what we want, which means we are good on the back-end side of things. But if we move our focus back to the page, you notice that the to-do has replaced the input field, which is not what we want. By default, htmx will insert the response gotten from the endpoint inside the element that triggers the request, which is this. And if I head back to the browser and inspect this, you notice that the input field was replaced with the response from the endpoint, which is not what we want. We can specify that we want the content to be inserted in a different element by making use of yet another attribute, which is AJAX target. This takes a CSS selector. Remember, we want the task to be displayed inside here, inside the table. So the target is going to be this table. So I'm going to give it an ID of task list so that I can point the target to it. So yeah, we're going to specify the ID we just created, which is task list. Let's head back to the browser. I'm going to create another to-do. Now the to-do is added in the correct place, but still not what we want because it is overriding the existing to-do, which is the default behavior of swapping. By the way, swapping is a term htmx uses for inserting a response into a target. But we don't want this default behavior of replacing the existing content. And if you take a look at the documentation on swapping, we have different options we can choose from. This is the default, which is it will put the content inside the target element, which is not what we want. But what we want is the after end, which appends the content after the target in the target parent element. So for that, we'll make use of another attribute, which is hx swap. Then the swap behavior we want is after end. Let's try it out one more time. So this is what we want. The new to-do is appended to the end of the list. Our to-do app is taking shape, but you'll notice that the input field is not being cleared after creating the to-do. We can fix this by listening to htmx event and clearing the field after a certain event has occurred. So if you take a look at the documentation one more time and head over to the event session, let me go to the reference. These are a list of events that htmx will fire at specific points in time. So we have abort, after unload, after process node, and the likes. And the one we're interested in is after unload, which is triggered after an AJAX request has completed processing a successful response. So let's head back to VS Code and make use of another attribute, hxOn. So the hxOn attribute is used to listen to htmx events, and the events I want to listen to is the htmx after unload. And what we want to do is clear the input field. From the after unload event, we have access to the event that is fired, and we can get the target from the event. Target here will be this form that comprises of the input field and the button. And what we are interested in is the input field, which we gave the name of title. So we can target that input field using the title. Then we can set the value to an empty string. Let's head over to the browser and create another to-do. And just as we expect, the to-do has been created and is being displayed in the correct way, and the input field has also been cleared. And with this, we can wrap up this lesson and take it further in the next lesson.